Yeah.
Well, and I think you compare it to any successful business. You know, when you look at leaders that have open door policies, that are willing to listen to your ideas, they may not always think they're the greatest ideas, but I can guarantee they're listening to it and figuring out what part of this idea can be the most effective part of how I can change what we're doing. You know, I think when you look at, like I said, when you look at successful businesses and CEOs and leaders in business that have followed that kind of business model and have been very successful with it, you see the same thing in politics as well. You know, I look at any supervisor I've ever had that has had an open door policy, that's willing to listen to your ideas, that's willing to work with you and try to come up with the best outcome. Like I said, they might sit there and when you're finished, in the back of their minds, they're thinking, that's the craziest idea I've ever heard. But they're also listening because there's something in what you said that could be pulled out and put into another idea that's going to make it even stronger. So, you know, I absolutely agree. I think Doug he's an amazing individual that we have here in York County. I think on both sides of the aisle, he's well respected and well liked. And I think, you know, more candidates and more of our elected officials could learn a lot just by following him around for a day and seeing how he handles himself as the county commissioner.
Yeah, and he is everywhere. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I mean, he was telling Anton about his schedule. It's like, well, I have this on Saturday and Sunday, and it's like, and Anton's like, did you take a vacation?
Yeah.
He's like, well, I think the last vacation I had was like 20 years ago. It's amazing.
Just a few weeks ago, we were at the Democrats were at an event at Cadorus Park up outside of Hanover, and I saw Commissioner Hoke there, and I left early from that event to get back to Equality Fest here in York. We had a table where we were handing out information, and I walked up to the table, and I wasn't at the table maybe 5 minutes, and here comes Commissioner Hoke. I honestly, I swear he was at the picnic when I left, the first event, and then he was at Equality Fest when I got there, and I don't know how he travels like that. Somehow he's, like I said, either he's got clones or he's got a Star Trek type device where he's beaming from one place to another. Yeah, but I mean, but that's people love seeing him out because it shows a genuine consideration for what they're passionate about, and the fact that he's giving up his time, giving up his personal time many times to be a part of the community. You know, I think is just, it's so impressive. It's so refreshing to see that, you know, coming from an elected official.
Yeah. Well, now I know the York Federation Democratic Women, they've been growing in membership.
Yeah.
How about the York Democratic Party? Are you
seeing? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're seeing. I just was talking to someone the other day, and I said, usually in a presidential year, we see more volunteers. Obviously, again, it's that's the cool elected year, you know, the election year. Usually after the convention, it's about a week or so, we start to see volunteers start to trickle in, and then more and more after Labor Day. It was really interesting this year that immediately after the Democratic convention was over, that Friday, we had like 2 or 3 volunteers at our headquarters that day, and they couldn't keep up with the phone calls and the people coming in the door wanting to volunteer. And it wasn't all Democrats that were coming in, there were Republicans as well. And it was just kind of, again, it's one of those, this is a different year than what we've been seeing. But in general, absolutely, we're seeing growth. We're bringing more committee people on. Basically, weekly, we're seeing more committee people coming into the party. We see our committee people as being some of our strongest volunteers because, again, they're the ones that are on the ground. They're doing a lot of the volunteer work. They're knocking doors, they're making phone calls, they're involving their neighbors, and they're getting the message for our candidates out there. And by expanding that base, it not only is going to be expanding, you know, the ideas and the progressive movement of the Democrats, but it's also going to be helping to foster new candidates as well. You know, we'll be able to use our committee people to either run themselves if they're interested, or give us recommendations as to who should be running in this particular race. So we're definitely seeing some growth there, and just on a volunteer basis. I mean, we have our headquarters right now is open on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 10 to 4, and we have, you know, at least a dozen volunteers in there every one of those days, and we'll be opening up more certainly as we get closer to the election. And I have no doubt we're going to be seeing volunteers in there during those days as well. Even on off hours, I was just at our headquarters last night for a meeting, and there were a group of volunteers in the front room, there were a group of volunteers in the back room, and they were working on separate things, but they were busy and buzzing. And for a Wednesday night, that's impressive to see that and know that the energy that's there is being relayed to the voters as well, and getting the message out to those voters.
Well, I had a statement from you. You're talking about Josh, and you're talking about Trump. And Susan Burns actually came out and said she couldn't support Trump because of obvious reasons, the veterans, and then are you seeing people, Republicans, rethinking their party party alliance now because of some of the things that he's been saying and doing?
We absolutely are. And it was interesting because there was this trend before the primary where we were seeing just across the board here in Pennsylvania, the Democratic voter registration started to drop and Republicans started to pick up. And a lot of people asked the question, well, why is that happening? And my answer to that was, because of Trump. People wanted to get behind the phenomenon that was Trump during the primary election. And yes, while there was a competitive race going on still on the Democratic ticket, even by the time it got to Pennsylvania, it was beginning to be a little bit clear who the nominee was going to be. So the same kind of energy that we saw in 2008 when President Obama and Secretary Clinton were running against each other in the primary, we saw that on the Republican side this time, and we saw that shift go a little bit towards the Republicans. I don't know that we're seeing them switch their party, but we're definitely seeing, voters that are coming back from the Republican side that they can't vote for Trump. They absolutely can't. They despise what he stands for. I've got a relative, we were talking before the show here, that I've got a relative who has been a Republican all of her life and has voted pretty much straight Republican all her life. That every time I see her, she's asking, can I get a new voter registration because I can't be a Republican anymore. This is not the Republican Party that I grew up with. This is not the Republican Party that I believed in. I can't be a Republican anymore. And to hear her say that is just astonishing to me. I mean, it absolutely just blows my mind knowing, where her stance has been for all these years. But I think it's representative of a lot of people in the community, a lot of people in the country in general. You can only be so nasty, and you can only see that for an entertainment value for so long before you all of a sudden realize that the reality star is reality, and you start to realize what could really happen if the unspeakable were to happen. And I will say I've been publicly critical of some of the candidates, the Republican candidates that are out there this year that support Donald Trump. I do not understand how they can get behind him. Scott Perry, we just talked about him a little while ago, has been a huge supporter of Trump, has been one of the first people out there behind him locally that we know of. And for someone like Scott, who has so admirably served this country, I find it very hard for him. I don't know how he can be behind someone like Trump, who has constantly knocked down veterans. And Trump will tell you, I support veterans, I give money to veterans. Well, we saw he had this big fundraiser back in the early part of the year. Instead of going to the debate in Iowa, he decided he was going to do this fundraiser for veterans. And it wasn't until people started to call him out on the fact that he never donated that money that he was supposed to. It wasn't until they called him out that he actually put the money over towards these veterans groups. So I don't know. I just find it very difficult for individuals who have stood for so many issues, just throw them away because they want to toe the party line. They want to be behind the guy that is the presumptive leader of their party. I would hope that they have better judgment than that. I would hope that as a representative population, our voters would have better judgment than that. I think when you get down to it, you look at someone like Secretary Clinton. I don't know that there has ever been anyone that is more prepared for this job. I think her experience, I think her knowledge, her leadership in general. When you look at, how she handled herself in the Senate, how she handled herself as Secretary of State, even how she really kind of reformed what the image of the modern First Lady was. I mean, you did not see First Ladies that were as politically active or as engaged in the issues as you did, Secretary Clinton when she was the First Lady. So she's almost over prepared for this, and I do think that she's going to be a phenomenal president when elected, and I think it's a stark contrast to what we see on the other side with no platform really, no knowledge of the system, and really no leadership ability at all from the Republican side right now. So that was a long way around it, but yes, we've seen Republicans that are coming and supporting the Democratic candidate, and not just the presidential candidate. They're voting down ticket as well. What you hear nationally about Trump is bringing down the down ticket, some of these Senate races. I think all you got to do is look at the Senate race here in Pennsylvania, and the fact that as soon as Katie McGinty came out as the candidate for as a Democrat for Senate, she was pretty much dead even in the polls with Pat Toomey, and she stayed there all along. And to be going up against a long-term incumbent like Toomey, and to be even at this point in the year, it's impressive. It's really impressive. And the fact that several of the polls have her even leading him, I think is just an indication that not only are people jumping off Trump's bandwagon, but they're abandoning the whole party line at this point.
Yeah.
So I think as a Republican, if I had advice for the party, be wary, And I've said this all along, it may be entertaining to watch this guy at the top, but he's going to drag everyone down with him.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah,
I think it's very scary, and I think people need to start doing their homework as well. You need to start looking at the different candidates, and again, I'm saying across the board. I'm not just saying Republicans, but Democrats as well, because there's good and bad in both.
Right.
I'm not going to sit here and demonize all the Republicans and say all the Democrats are wonderful, because we all know they're people.
Yep.
So you're gonna have good and bad in both.
Yep.
But the important thing is to really look at those records and see how they're voting. And when you look at like Perry's record, there's a lot of things that are not right with that record.
Yeah.
There are a lot of questions. There's a lot of concerns.
Right. Yeah, and I don't think it's just Perry either. I think it's all of our representatives in the state house and in the state senate as well. Now, granted, we have one candidate, on the ballot for state senate in the 31st district, John Borsha, who was again just recommended to the state committee this week due to a vacancy there. But I think all of the candidates that are out there, all the representatives, I agree absolutely that people should be doing their homework and looking at the issues and seeing where people stand, because you might say that you're a Republican or a Democrat, but until you actually see how that representative votes, you don't know if they're effectively following through with your beliefs, and that's where I absolutely agree. You should be doing your research. You should be doing your homework. Don't just watch Fox News or MSNBC. I'll be impartial there. Don't watch just those. Read the newspapers. Go online, find out what the voting records are. Stay clear of some of the news sites because they can be, jaded one way or the other. But definitely go on. You can easily pull down voting records and take a look at what's out there and see how people have voted. And not to go back to that issue that we talked about earlier about voting, that's the way you're going to be able to hold these people accountable, is if you don't like the way that they've been voting, you get another candidate on the ballot, and then you get that representative out, that leader out. So
yeah, and people shouldn't be afraid to voice concerns to their reps. I mean, I've done this with Kevin Schreiber because I like Kevin, but there's been instances where, and it's not him specifically, it's more of a staff issues where I haven't felt that I was responded to in a timely fashion. So it's one of those things where don't be afraid to voice concerns, because they may not know. Right. They may not know what's going on. You have somebody who's splitting their time between here and Harrisburg. Yeah. Or here in D.C.
Yeah. Well, and I will say too, to take it back to Carol Evans, in conversations that we've had with her, the night that she was recommended, and since then, one of the things that we've said to her is, what are your plans when the House isn't in session? Because we hear that all the time. It's it's basically a part-time job. A lot of people feel, because the legislators are in Harrisburg for just a small part of the year, passing legislation, or at least working on legislation. But then what are they doing the rest of the year? And that's one of the questions that was posed at our forum last week to the candidates. What are you going to be doing? And Carol has expressed, I'm going to be in the community. That's the only way I'm going to be able to understand what the issues are and hear what people have to say and what's important to them. She's going to have, obviously, presence, not only just an office in the area, but she's going to be out at community events. She's going to be talking to the people of York and the 95th in general. Because that's the only way you're going to be able to effectively represent the people, and she gets that. I know Kevin gets that. I know a lot of our again, I say a lot of our Democratic candidates do. Again, I go back to Susie Byrne, though. I think she's a great example of a Republican that absolutely listens and is compassionate, and it will affect change based on what she's hearing from the community.
Yeah, and I gave her kudos for coming out against Trump.
Yeah.
Because I think that took a lot
of
courage for her to actually say in print that, I'm not endorsing this person because I don't believe in what they're saying. I don't like their message.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think anytime someone that's an elected official for a specific party is able to break with that and, kind of show that they support or don't support the party line, it takes some courage to do that, and definitely they deserve some respect for that. And like I said, I've mentioned her name a couple times. I'm sure there's people out there, Democrats, that are like, no. But I think part of the problem is we do have to give credit where credit is due sometimes. And someone like her, and someone like Doug, and someone like Carol Evans, these are all people that are willing to work with the other side. And when they're able to be able to reach out and work like that, that's the way we're going to see things get done. That's the way we're going to see Harrisburg change. That's the way we're going to see DC change. That's the way we're going to get to see, our school boards and our city councils change. So I definitely, I think you've got to give that credit when it's deserved.
Yeah, because we're all people.
Yeah.
And we do need to get along.
Yeah.
And nothing gets done if we just bicker and name call. And we already talked about the person that's the biggest offender of that.
No, you're absolutely right.
But
you're absolutely right.
But we have about 5 minutes left. So is there anything else that you want to get in, and anything about the candidates you want to talk about? Anything you want to remind the audience? Anything happening?
Well, one, and I mentioned some of the candidates earlier, but a lot of times in a presidential year and then at a local level, our people in the middle get lost. We do have state row offices that we're electing this year. Auditor General is Eugene DePasquale, and I've mentioned him a couple times, obviously, because he's our hometown hero. We like to praise Eugene all the time.
Eugene and Doug are kind of like the standard.
And I think if anyone questions why Eugene should be reelected to Auditor General, exactly what we just said. Go back and look what he's done the last 4 years. There's no one in York County that doubted that he was going to work hard when he got in there. I think he exceeded everyone's expectations. This is a man that I jokingly said here a few weeks ago. He was at the convention in Philadelphia, and the state party chair took a picture of Eugene standing on the convention floor holding his iPhone, reading an audit while in the middle of the convention. And all I could think was, only Eugene would do that. Only Eugene in probably one of the biggest, national spotlights ever for Philadelphia and for the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania. Only Eugene would be standing on the floor of the convention doing work, and that's just the kind of guy he is. Along those same lines, Josh Shapiro, who is running for Attorney General this year, I think locally, if people like Eugene, you've got to like Josh. They are two peas in a pod. I mean, they are very similar leadership style. They both are same kind of work ethic, very, very good leader. He was a strong representative in Harrisburg, left being a representative to go back and be a county commissioner in Montgomery County, where he's really turned that county around as the president of the commissioners there in that county. So, I think Josh is to be respected, and like I said, very similar to Eugene. They were very good friends in the State House, and I can see why, because they're very, very similar personality, very similar work ethic, very just strong leaders in general. And Joe Torsella, while he's had some stints in government, he is the outsider for treasurer. He is a treasurer out and out. He is a man that is he's always looking at the numbers. He's always figuring out, how to best balance the checkbook, in a way. And I think, I think when you look at his experience as well, you're going to see that, again, there's no one more effective and that can be stronger in that position than Joe. And he's got some great ideas. I love his idea of he wants to create accounts for children as soon as they're born. Great. That is basically a savings account towards college. So, so that when they get of age, there's some money there. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit more than that to get them to be able to pay for it. But at least the foundation is there. So, and I love that idea, and that kind of goes along with, you tie into Bernie Sanders and his progressive ideas, and how that's worked into the platform. Joe's been talking about that for a long time as well. So, I think just those three candidates at the state level, we could see some really good leaders there as well.
Okay, well, that's great. And I think, Bernie also was talking about giving free schooling, public college to individuals. So who knows? Yeah. Who knows how long that'll take, how many states that'll start in, and where it'll go. So that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's great to see it in the platform for sure, because at least it puts it, people are going to pay attention to it now. So definitely. Yeah.
So I want to thank you for coming. I think we're coming down on time here. We have about a minute or so yet. So I want to thank you for coming. Yeah. I think this was a great discussion.
Yes.
I don't think it was that painless.
No.
So hopefully everybody else agrees. So next week I'm going to have Yasser Ahmed on again, and we're going to talk a little more about Islam.